The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted pine, the kind of scent that usually softened my edges. Carols floated from the old radio while forks tapped faint rhythms against porcelain. It should have felt like the kind of Christmas Eve memory you frame in your mind, warm, safe, ordinary. Instead, the air thinned the moment Margaret set down her glass and said it. "Edward, you are just difficult." She said it lightly, almost playfully, but everyone heard the echo under the laughter. The word caught somewhere between the chandelier and my chest. I smiled the way people do when they have forgotten how real smiling feels. Nodded and passed the gravy boat. The rest of the dinner passed impracticed. Politeness, small jokes, the ticking clock, and invisible chill threading through the tablecloth. When the dishes were cleared, I volunteered to take out the trash. Outside, the night was sharp with frost. Snowflakes turned slowly beneath the amber streetlight. The word pulsed in my ears, one syllable beating behind the heartbeat. Difficult. I stood there until my breath turned to mist and the house quieted behind me. Then my phone buzzed. One message, unread, timestamp, blinking close to midnight. I did not look. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and walked down the driveway, the snow whispering beneath my shoes, wondering when exactly I had become a problem to the people I loved most. My name is Edward Langford, 68 years old, born and aged within the comforting geometry of Toronto's neighborhoods, red brick symmetry and soft winter hush. I was an architect for 42 years, and in that time precision became less a skill than a creed. I believed in straight lines, balanced weight, careful proportion. Margaret used to laugh and say I even breathed in measured rhythm. I took it as a compliment. These days I am not so sure she meant it that way. For 4 decades we built a life inside the same patterns I used for building strong foundation, first then detail, then beauty. Our 2 children grew up in this house. Jason, quick with numbers and quicker with opinions. Emily, delicate voice but fierce belief in nurturing the overlooked, whether students or strangers. Their laughter filled the hallways for years, echoing over the same staircase where Margaret and I once shared whispered midnight plans. I thought we were a family made to last through any storm. Looking back, somewhere between family dinners and deadlines, my integrity hardened into something heavier. When Jason was younger and drew rough blueprints of imaginary cities, I would point out the misaligned lines. Good eye, I would tell him, but check the scale. When Emily decorated her school project too hastily, I would correct her color choice. For contrast, they thought I was teaching them care. They heard something colder critique. By the time Jason entered tech consulting, he called me old school with a grin that did not hide the edge underneath. Emily, usually gentle, told me once I drained the joy out of creativity. I laughed it off too quickly, perhaps. The truth is, their words struck the same tender place their mothers did somewhere along the line. Standards had become stiffness, and what I called excellence now looked like control. My career carried the same contradiction. I had spent decades pushing for sustainability in architecture long before the movement had marketing appeal. In the 90s, I presented concepts of solar orientation and efficient insulation to a boardroom of developers who blinked at me as though I had spoken another language. Too impractical, they said, too expensive. Years later, those same principles came back under different names: eco-friendly green design, and the very people who had dismissed them got awards for innovation. I watched quietly from the audience during retirement ceremonies, shaking their hands and congratulating them sincerely. Retirement for me was not an end, it was a shift in materials. I could not stop designing, only reduce the scale from towers to modest home repairs, from city grids to computer drafts. I discovered programming one rainy spring, curious if software could replicate my instinct for harmony. Within months I had drafted algorithms mapping structure stress for theoretical designs. It was clumsy at first, but something clicked. I could train a machine to foresee flaws before they appeared, imagine the waste, the accidents, the delays it could prevent. I spoke about it once at a casual reunion with old colleagues. They chuckled, not cruelly, but dismissively, the way men do when the past confuses the present. You should enjoy retirement, Ed, one said, patting my shoulder as they moved toward the bar. That was 3 years ago, and I let the project become a secret, quiet experiment, quiet pride. It was not resentment that kept me silent, it was peace. Sometimes the purest work is the unseen kind. Still, as another Christmas circled around, I noticed that my calmness looked to them like distance, and my patience like disengagement. Margaret began making decisions without asking to keep things simple. Jason rolled his eyes when I corrected his calculations on a home renovation. Emily told me gently to let people live their own way, so when The word difficult floated across the dinner table this year. It did not land out of nowhere. It was the echo of decades slowly misheard. The melody we once called love had been rewritten by time into something sharper, and this Christmas beneath the glow of the same old lights, I started to wonder whether every careful plan I had ever made had built walls instead of shelter. Morning arrived with the faint hum of the furnace and Margaret humming along to Bing Crosby. I sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper open but unread, watching steam rise from my coffee. The snow outside had thickened overnight, each flake adhering to another until the world looked neatly whitewashed. It was the kind of quiet that usually steadied me. Blue light through frosted glass, a holiday calm, but Margaret's movements carried a nervous efficiency. Plates placed, too gently, footsteps measured. She poured herself orange juice and waited longer than necessary before speaking. Edward, she began, voice dipped in the kind of politeness reserved for complicated customers. I have been thinking, maybe it is best if you stay here this time, just for the weekend at the chalet. The kids, well, everyone could use a little space to relax. The phrase "a little space" fluttered down like ash. I stared at the paper's headlines until the letters blurred together, then folded it carefully. If that is what you think will help them relax, I said. My voice came out steady, almost gentle. She rushed to interpret it as agreement. Instead of heartbreak, I knew you would understand. You always try to keep things easy. Easy, the word landed next to difficult, forming an absurd equation. I rose, carried my cup to the sink, rinsed it with precision, and began helping her pack. She chatted about the weather, about how much Jason's kids would love the snow, how she had left instructions for the neighbor to feed the cat. Every sentence built a small wall between us. Out in the driveway, breath clouding in the air, I loaded her suitcase into the trunk of the SUV. She kissed my cheek lightly, a gesture rehearsed through years of repetition. Try to rest, she said, as if rest was what I lacked. When the car disappeared beyond the bend, the silence hit with physical weight. The house no longer felt safe. It felt hollow. I walked through each room, automatically turning off lights that did not need to be off, habit of control masquerading as purpose. The clock ticked louder. Once alone, I put on an old record, the same one Margaret loved decades ago, a vinyl crackling rendition of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. The voice trembled with nostalgia. Mine joined for half a verse before breaking. The song ended, leaving the rhythmic spin of the turntable as my only company. Snow fell heavier, now draping the neighborhood in theater hush. From the window, the world looked perfectly serene, yet inside unease grew like ivy. I poured another coffee I did not need and opened my email, hoping routine could patch the hollow spaces. A notification pinged Jason's social channel. I should have ignored it, but curiosity betrayed me. One tap, and there it was, a group photo at the chalet table, Margaret radiant in her red sweater, Emily laughing, Jason mid-toast. The caption read, family time, no stress this year. I stared until the phone dimmed. The same ornament glinting above them had hung in our living room for 30 years before we downsized the decoration clutter. My absence seemed to brighten the frame. My reflection in the dark screen looked older than I remembered. The humiliation did not come as rage. It arrived as stillness, so quiet it could have been peace if not for the ache beneath. Perhaps I have built my life too precisely, corners too square for warmth to collect. Maybe integrity without softness isolates more effectively than sign. I stood, pushing the chair back carefully so it would not scrape the floor. A long breath escaped me. It condensed on the cold window pane and faded in the reflection. There was no family smiling, no chatter behind me, just a man balanced between pride and regret. Enough. If they needed relaxation, I would give it to them fully. I would spend Christmas with work that never judged me for detail. Down in the basement workshop, the air smelled of sawdust and machine oil. Clean truth. I flipped the switch. A strip of fluorescent light flickered, humming to life. Blueprints waited where I had left them, lines sharp and patient. I sat, hands steady again. The snow outside continued to fall, and for the first time that day I felt useful. Christmas Day unspooled in shades of white and silence. The only sound came from the radiator clicking in protest against the cold. I carried my mug downstairs to the basement, a half-finished space that had become both studio and sanctuary. Each step creaked like a metronome, counting down the hours of solitude. By the time I reached the workbench, the world above felt a continent away. The lamp's cone of light seemed small against the spread of blueprints and sketches, but its Stubborn glow comforted me on the screen lines of code waited patiently the algorithm I had started years ago, the one everyone dismissed as a technical indulgence. Back then my colleagues had smiled the way people smile at a friend's. Harmless madness. Ed, you have lost the plot, one of the partners had chuckled, patting the corner of my drawing as though it were a pet trying to predict steel fatigue with math emotions. Their laughter stayed behind my ribs long after the meeting ended. I booted the program, numbers rolled down the monitor in elegant symmetry, each iteration resolved into color stress. Points, angles, mapping harmony through probability. I updated formulas, rewrote functions, adjusted variables that had not existed when I first wrote them. Time folded inward. I was 38 again, sleeves rolled up, graphite smudge on my temple. Believing that logic and grace could occupy the same line, coffee mugs began to encircle the keyboard like humble sentinels. Every few hours I scraped back the stool and refilled them, the sharp scent of brew cutting through basement dust. The rhythm was hypnotic. Type, test, sip, watch algorithms dance through the tiny window above my bench, snow pressed against the glass as though time itself were trying to muffle me. The drifts grew thick enough to blur streetlights into watercolor stars, yet the lamp held its ground, a single circle of defiance against forgetting. By afternoon I had forgotten the hour entirely. The house had settled into deep quiet, the kind that amplifies heartbeat and keyboard alike. At one point Caroller's distant voices floated down the street, muffled through snow. The tune Silent Night naturally felt both ironic and appropriate. I hummed along without irony until my throat tightened. Evening drifted in unnoticed until the basement chilled again. I paused, flexing cramped fingers scanning the screens. Endless loops of motion until the figures finally stilled in perfection. The test models matched prediction to tolerance within 5 decimal places. A younger version of me would have punched the air. The current one simply whispered, "There you are." The notion of sharing it crossed my mind hesitantly, like a shy guest knocking at the door. I opened my old address book folder, digital now though. The names still looked ghostly. One stood out, Daniel Klein, colleague from years back, the rare listener in the sea of talkers. Last I had heard he had gone into consulting. I assumed small contracts, same grind as the rest of us. Without overthinking, I attached the file and typed a short message. Thought you might appreciate the logic inversion. For Merry Christmas, old friend. Ed. Click sent. A harmless courtesy, I told myself. A nod across the decades, nothing more. I returned to the workbench, tidied scattered pencils and plotters that had not drawn in years. The basement still smelled of graphite and burnt coffee. Outside wind rumbled down the eaves as though the city itself shifted in its sleep. I took that as a cue to stop. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Before shutting off the lamp, I opened the program once more, just to see it breathe. The diagram glowed, a pulsing lattice of light, mathematics rendered into something tender in it. I could almost hear the quiet heartbeat of every structure I had ever built. My eyes stung though from fatigue or sentiment. I could not say. Satisfied, I saved everything twice, labeling the folder Langford Stress Predict Final Docs. The irony of calling anything final not lost on me. Precursor blinked like a tiny lighthouse guiding the ship back to shore. I closed the laptop, heard the click that signaled rest, and exhaled. Snow pressed harder at the window. The world above was buried in softness. The lamp flickered, once stubborn and faithful, before I turned it off. Midnight crept closer, indifferent yet expectant. I climbed the stairs slowly, unaware that the smallest gesture, a friendly email sent from solitude, had just set something enormous in motion. The house was dark except for the glow of my hallway nightlight, a faint amber disk on the floorboards. I had gone to bed late, satisfied and emptied in equal measure, when the phone vibrated against the nightstand. The clock read 12:01 a.m. At first I thought it was an automated alert or one of those holiday promotions that never sleep, but the name flashing across the screen froze me mid-reach. Jason. He never called at midnight. I answered quickly, heart twitching with alarm. Jason. His voice cracked through the line, breathless. Dad, what the hell is on the news? I sat up. News? What news? Check it. Turn on the TV, the computer, anything. They are saying your name. It is everywhere. He sounded halfway between panic and disbelief. I switched on the television in the corner. The sudden burst of blue light cutting the darkness. The newscaster's voice was careful but excited, one of those tones reserved for miracles. Disguised as business stories. Global tech corporation announces overnight acquisition and implementation of a revolutionary predictive stress analysis algorithm. developed by retired Canadian architect Edward Langford. The room tilted. My own face appeared on screen in a faded archival photograph from years ago. Corporate. I had not seen since my last award dinner. Below it, the ticker rolled Langford System. Credited as architectural breakthrough Jason. I murmured, unsure if I was even speaking into the phone or the cold air. That is unexpected, Dad. They just said you are the primary patent holder, $8 million in licensing. I blinked, trying to process the words. My email must have reached Daniel somehow. He had taken the design to Global Tech, the largest engineering consortium on the continent. They had cross-referenced my old filings. Still valid, apparently renewed automatically. Through residual clauses somewhere out there, boardrooms were applauding a project that had been born in a Canadian basement under a flickering lamp. The phone vibrated again. Another call waiting. Margaret. Messages stacked like snowfall. Ex-colleagues, old students, journalists asking for comment. I silenced them all and went to the kitchen. Instead, one discipline at a time. Kettle, mug, tea bag. Dad, are you still there? Jason's question cut through the rushing sound of boiling water. I am here, I said. Just making tea. He laughed, more a gasp. You are on every newsfeed on the planet and you are making tea? I find it helps perspective. I poured the water, watched the surface swirl amber. My reflection trembled in it, a ghost I half recognized. Jason exhaled loudly on the other end. You knew this could happen, did you not? Exactly. I sent the file to Daniel earlier today. I did not expect this. He was silent for a long while, then said more quietly, all those years we joked that you could not retire properly. You were still building. That is what architects do. Even when no one asks, we keep building. Through the kitchen window, snow was falling again, thicker now, soft flakes spiraling down like quiet applause. Somewhere beyond it, newspapers were being printed, my name sliding across ink rollers. The absurdity almost made me laugh. Jason's voice broke through again, gentler. Dad, I am proud of you. The words caught me off guard. Thank you, son. I mean it, and for what it is worth, I think we misunderstood you. Maybe being difficult just meant seeing further ahead than we could. I smiled into the darkness. Being right too early is rarely comfortable. He chuckled, a small sound of relief. Mom's calling me too. She is freaking out, she said. Reporters are camped outside the chalet. What should we do? Have breakfast? I said. Enjoy the attention. It probably will not last. Will you give interviews? No, the work speaks fine without me. Let the snow have the headlines. Another silence followed. The meaningful kind. Finally, Jason whispered. You really never cared about recognition, did you? I cared about the work being used properly. I just wanted it to live beyond me. Outside, a plow moved along our street, pushing snow into neat, obedient rows. Even in chaos, order had its way. Before hanging up, Jason said, we will come home tomorrow. All of us promise. I will be here, I told him, and the line clicked off. I carried my tea to the window. The lights from across driveways gleamed on the snowbanks, and above them the city seemed to hold its breath. My name scrolling on screens felt less like triumph and more like punctuation at the end of a long, quiet sentence. For years, I had been accused of caring too much about exactness, and now that exactness had quietly rewritten our family story, I took a sip, strong, almost bitter, and smiled. Fame, like sugar, was unnecessary, but sometimes inevitable. Midnight had delivered the truth. No one asked for patience can echo louder than ambition. When I returned to the living room, the television still murmured my biography. I muted it, letting only the image remain, a younger me, idealistic and unaware of how far persistence would stretch. In that silence, I heard Margaret's laughter from some forgotten summer. Jason's small boy questions about blueprints. Emily's careful voice reading under a desk lamp. I exhaled. The storm outside was bright with reflection, each snowflake catching light before melting. Tiny transient applauses for a man too slow to chase recognition and too stubborn to stop creating. Morning began loosening the sky from black to pewter. The kettle clicked again, as if to remind me that life would continue in ordinary patterns. I turned off the TV, shut the curtains, and finished my tea. Recognition had arrived without ceremony. Exactly the way it should for someone who built his life on quiet precision. By mid-morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds, sharpening every dusty surface into gold. I had just finished another mug of tea when gravel crunched on the driveway. Tires hurried, doors, the familiar shape of Margaret's silhouette moving toward the porch. She did not knock. She never had to. Edward, she said, breath fogging in the entryway. Her voice carried awe and apology in equal weights. I saw the broadcasts. I did not know. I did not either, I murmured, setting her coat on the hook. She looked around as though the house she had left a day ago had aged decades overnight. The phone has not stopped ringing. Reporters, friends, even Pastor Dawes, you have started. A phenomenon. I smiled faintly. All I started was an email. We stood there in awkward distance until she whispered, I'm sorry, not for missing the story, for missing you. The words pressed harder than any compliment. You did not miss me, I said quietly. You just stopped seeing what I meant when I cared. I thought teaching detail was love. You heard judgment. Her eyes filled, but did not spill. And I thought your silence was stubbornness. Distance. Maybe it was just fatigue. The kettle clicked behind. I poured water as peace offering. We sat at the table, same chairs, same place. Matt's two ghosts learning warmth again. Outside, the street hummed with new commotion. Vans idled, cameras angled toward our porch. I ignored the doorbell ringing in polite succession. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You are not going to answer for Christmas. I shook my head. Let them write what they need without me. They will survive the mystery. She laughed for the first time since Christmas Eve, the sound uneven but real. Soon, Jason's car appeared, followed by Emily's. They came in bundled against the cold, equal parts proud and embarrassed. Jason clasped my hand too firmly. Dad, the company wants to host a press conference next week. No, he blinked. But this could create spectacle. I finished. The work does not need celebration. It needs stewardship. Make sure they implement it properly. That is reward enough. Emily sat down beside Margaret, eyes glistening. We treated you like a footnote, Dad. I am sorry. I turned the apology away gently. If this program teaches anything, it is that every structure stands because hidden pieces carry their share. You were my hidden strength, all of you, even when you did not realize it. Margaret reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. You old sentimental architect, she said, smiling. Our breakfast stretched on while camera lenses flashed through curtains. Offers poured in by email, speaking engagements, investment pitches, the kind of frantic admiration that arrives too late. I opened none of them. What mattered was here Margaret spreading jam on toast, exactly how she had when we were newly married. Jason refilling everyone's cups, Emily humming some tune from childhood. Outside, journalists eventually abandoned patients packing their gear into vans. A neighbor waved curiously as they drove away. For the first time in 2 days, silence reclaimed the street. A week later, the frenzied, dulled articles grew shorter. Headlines shifted toward new sensations. Our lives, however, found a steadier rhythm. The house felt lighter but unchanged, the same ticking clock, the same slight slope in the hallway, wood all now touched with mutual gentleness. Progress, I decided, rarely roars. It settles quietly like snow finding its shape on familiar ground. The snow returned exactly a year later, softer this time, as if winter itself were apologizing for the last one. I had begun consulting again, quiet projects, mentorship, mostly sitting with young architects who reminded me of my impatient former self. Over brown bag lunches and half-rolled blueprints, I told them the same thing every time. Care loudly, even when people call it difficult. Nothing worth building ever came from indifference. They listened, took notes. And I recognized in their eagerness the same spark that once made me troublesome to comfortable men. Margaret came along on weekends, now pretending it was just to get some fresh air. She walked the empty sites with her arm threaded through mine, sketching in a notepad she claimed was for grocery lists. We no longer argued about precision. She would tease, I would smile, and somewhere between jokes we rediscovered the easy rhythm of partnership. Love, I learned, does not have to be proved. It only needs to be tended. Jason and Emily visited, often bringing the grandchildren, who pushed toy trucks through sawdust piles. The workshop felt alive again, laughter echoing against beams that once held only silence newspapers rarely mentioned. My algorithm anymore, I preferred it that way. Anonymity suits endurance. What stayed in circulation were the young builders guided to believe that excellence and empathy could coexist. When the next Christmas arrived, our house buzzed with the same clinking and carols as before, but the tension that once frosted every word had melted. We decorated together, Jason wrestling with lights, Emily directing from the stepladder, Margaret handing me delicate ornaments with mock warning. Outside, snow feathered against the windows, inside warmth collected in every corner, gratitude layered thicker than tinsel. As I placed the final ornament, an old ceramic star, cracked at one point, repaired with gold glue, I thought again of that improbable word that had started it all. Difficult. I smiled. It no longer felt like criticism. It sounded more like a compliment, whispered across time to anyone who refuses to lower the bar simply to be loved. Some men chase peace by being agreeable, I found mine. By being agreeable, I found mine. By standing firm enough to build it, asterisk.